Clara had never flown anywhere but in her dreams. One hurried step, a wrong gate, and suddenly she was on Julian's private jet, staring at polished leather seats and crystal glasses as the engines hummed beneath her feet. His gaze, sharp yet curious, lingered a fraction too long, and in that heartbeat, her ordinary life trembled on the edge of something she hadn't dared imagine, a romance that could sweep her into a world she never thought she belonged. And Paris was just the beginning. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic, a clean scent that never quite masked the underlying hum of exhaustion. Clara's shoes clicked against the linoleum as she wove between gurneys and nurses, her white coat flapping slightly with each hurried step. She carried a tray of medications, her fingers trembling just enough from fatigue that she nearly dropped the syringe of painkiller. "Clara, slow down," a colleague called, her voice tinged with worry and amusement. "You're going to give someone a heart attack before they even reach surgery." Clara offered a tired smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Smiling while running from one crisis to the next had become a reflex, a way to keep the world from seeing just how fragile she sometimes felt. She loved being a nurse, loved the moments of quiet triumph, when a patient's fever broke or a scared child finally stopped crying. But the relentless pace, the thankless hours, the endless demands, it all felt like a tide slowly pulling her under. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she fished it out, glancing at the screen. A reminder blinked back. Flight to Paris at 3:30 p.m. Clara's heart skipped. She had promised herself a weekend away, a tiny escape from the fluorescent-lit world of the hospital, and she had been looking forward to it for weeks. But looking at her schedule, the thought of leaving now made her stomach twist. There were patients to check on, forms to fill, and another nurse on break who seemed just as stretched thin as she was. She exhaled, tucking the phone back into her pocket. "Just a quick getaway," she muttered under her breath. "Nothing extravagant. No one will even notice I'm gone." Meanwhile, miles away, Julian stood aboard his private jet, checking the itinerary on a sleek tablet. His fingers tapped the screen with meticulous precision. Every detail mattered: departure time, crew schedules, catering requests, seating arrangements. To anyone watching, he appeared calm, effortless, the billionaire who had it all: money, power, charm. Yet beneath the tailored suit and polished exterior, Julian's chest tightened with an unspoken restlessness. Life had been predictable for too long, and predictability was a cage he had grown comfortable living in. He glanced out the small oval window at the tarmac, watching luggage carts scuttle about like ants. He would be in Paris within hours, attending a high-profile gala that promised glitter, influence, and business opportunities. But his mind wandered to something he couldn't name, a feeling that maybe life's richness wasn't measured in numbers or appointments. And then, in a way neither of them could have predicted, their worlds collided. Clara had rushed through the airport security checkpoint, clutching her boarding pass, eyes darting at the screens overhead. She had rehearsed this trip countless times in her head: how to get through check-in efficiently, how to navigate the long halls of departures, and how to sneak a small pastry before takeoff without feeling guilty. But in her frazzled state, she had made a crucial misstep. The gate number on her pass matched the number on a sleek jet stationed at the far end of the tarmac. It looked so inviting, so impossibly private, with polished aluminum that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Without thinking, she followed the signs, assuming her ticket had finally granted her a first-class boarding lane. Julian, reclining in his leather chair, did not notice her first. The cabin was quiet, the hum of engines beneath the floor vibrating softly. She stepped in, cheeks flushed, clutching her tote bag to her chest like a shield. Her eyes widened at the opulence surrounding her: cream leather seats, velvet pillows, and the soft, intoxicating scent of sandalwood in the air. "Excuse me," she stammered, unsure where to look. I think I'm in the wrong place." Julian's gaze lifted from his tablet, sharp and assessing. His brow arched at the sight of a small, frantic woman standing amidst his private jet's lavish interior.
There was something disarmingly genuine about her, a kind of unpolished charm that immediately drew his attention. "You might be," he said smoothly, leaning back slightly in his chair. His voice was calm, controlled, but with an undercurrent of curiosity. "Or maybe the wrong place is exactly where you're supposed to be." Clara's mouth opened, closed, and then opened again. I'm sorry. I thought this was my flight. I must have—" Julian raised a hand, stopping her frantic apology midstream. "No need to apologize. Sit." His tone was firm, but not unkind, a subtle command that somehow put her at ease. She hesitated, then lowered herself into a seat opposite him, hands folded tightly in her lap. She took in the cabin, noticing details she could never afford to notice in her ordinary life. The soft golden glow of ambient lighting, the polished wood accents, a crystal decanter filled with something amber-colored, the kind of luxury she had only glimpsed in magazines. Her heart raced, part excitement, part fear. "Paris?" she asked, unable to hide her quiver in the voice. Julian smiled faintly, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Oui, Paris." The engine's hum grew louder as the plane prepared for takeoff. Clara's fingers clenched her tote bag, knuckles white. This was real. She was really on a billionaire's jet, heading to Paris with a man she didn't know. The absurdity of it made her laugh nervously. Julian observed her quietly, noting the way her eyes darted to the window, the nervous tapping of her foot. There was something refreshingly honest about her anxiety, something that reminded him of a time when life had been unfiltered and raw, before wealth and success had built walls around him. "I've never flown like this before," Clara admitted, her voice softer now. I don't even usually leave town without my schedule packed to the brim." "Then perhaps this will be a first," Julian replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Firsts can be enlightening." The small exchange hung in the air, a thread of tension and possibility that neither fully understood yet. Outside the window, the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the tarmac. Inside, the space between them was charged, a silent acknowledgement that something extraordinary had just begun. Clara's mind raced with what-ifs. What if she embarrassed herself further? What if he decided she didn't belong here at all? She forced herself to breathe, letting the hum of the engine soothe her nerves. Julian, for his part, found his thoughts returning again and again to the way she had entered his carefully ordered world. Unannounced, unpredictable, yet completely disarming. There was a spark he hadn't expected, a tiny crack in the facade of his perfectly controlled life. The flight attendants approached, offering a selection of refreshments. Clara accepted a sparkling water, still staring out at the clouds gathering in the distance. Julian poured himself a glass of red wine, swirling it in the glass with a practiced hand, but his eyes never left her. For a moment, the cabin was quiet, except for the soft hum of engines and the faint clinking of glass. Clara's lips curved into a small smile, and Julian's hand brushed against hers as he adjusted the decanter. Neither of them moved away. Neither of them spoke. But in that silence, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that this encounter, absurd and serendipitous as it was, would change them both. Hours seemed to stretch and compress as the plane cut through the sky. Clara found herself laughing at a small joke Julian made about the overabundance of pillows. She had never imagined herself in a setting like this, let alone laughing so freely with someone like him. Julian, in turn, was drawn to the way her eyes sparkled despite nerves, to the quiet strength she carried beneath the surface of her frazzled exterior. As the sun began to set, casting the cabin in a soft, rosy glow, Julian leaned back in his chair. "Paris," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "It's better than I remembered." Clara looked at him, noticing for the first time the faint shadow behind his eyes, the trace of loneliness, the hint of yearning. She wanted to say something comforting, something that bridged the gap between them. But all that came out was a small, tentative, "I think you'll like it." Julian's lips quirked into a faint smile. He didn't know it yet, but the journey had already begun. One that would challenge, surprise, and transform them both. The first act ended not with fireworks or declarations, but with a quiet understanding. Two lives, once ordinary and predictable, had collided in a way that neither could have orchestrated. And as the jet soared above the clouds toward the city of light, both Clara and Julian felt it, the stirring of something new, fragile, and utterly irresistible.
The jet touched down on the smooth tarmac of Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport with a gentle shudder. Clara's hands gripped the armrests, heart thumping in sync with the subtle vibration under her fingers. Outside the window, the city stretched out in a mosaic of rooftops, the Seine glinting like liquid silver in the late afternoon sun. She had only seen Paris in photographs, films, and magazine spreads, but now it was alive, tangible, and far more overwhelming than she had imagined. Julien had already risen, straightening his tailored jacket and surveying the disembarking crew with practiced authority. He moved with that same effortless elegance he carried in boardrooms, yet his eyes occasionally flicked toward Clara with a flicker of amusement. Something about the way she peeked over her seat, nervous yet curious, seemed to awaken a part of him that he usually kept locked away, the part that enjoyed surprises, imperfections, and the unpredictable rhythm of life. Clara followed him down the narrow aisle, stepping carefully in her sensible flats. Each footfall felt almost sacrilegious in the space of luxury. Soft carpets, ambient lighting, subtle gleam of polished wood. She imagined how absurd this must look. Her, a tired nurse in a slightly rumpled coat, navigating the same jet that few people in the world could ever access. And yet, Julien's presence beside her, calm, observant, somehow reassuring, made the whole scenario feel less like a mistake and more like fate. "Welcome to Paris," Julien said lightly as he guided her past the waiting car, a sleek black sedan with dark-tinted windows. His voice carried a rhythm of familiarity she couldn't place, soothing in a way that contrasted sharply with her nervous energy. "Merci," she murmured, cheeks flushed. "It's bigger than I imagined." He glanced at her, his gaze lingering just a moment too long for casual conversation. Most first-timers say that, but it's only the beginning. The ride into the city was quiet at first. Clara kept her eyes glued to the window, mesmerized by the cobblestone streets, the ornate balconies overflowing with flowers, and the occasional cafe spilling life onto the sidewalks. Julien, meanwhile, watched her, noting the subtle ways she took in the city, the tilt of her head, the slight widening of her eyes, the tiny smiles that escaped despite herself. "You really haven't been to Paris before?" he asked, voice casual but curious. "No," Clara admitted, fingers twisting the strap of her bag. "I've only ever dreamed about it, I guess." She laughed softly, a self-conscious sound. "It's silly, isn't it? I mean, I work all the time, and when I get a day off, I usually just sleep." Julien smiled, something almost like warmth softening the edges of his usual reserve. "Not silly," he said. "Everyone deserves to dream, but not everyone gets to step into those dreams." His tone was playful, teasing, yet there was a sincerity beneath it that caught Clara off guard. The first moment of real emotional spark came when Julien arrived at their hotel, a boutique jewel tucked along the Seine. Julien's reservation had been flawless, the suite overlooking the river, bathed in golden light as the sun dipped toward the horizon. He gestured toward the room with a faintly theatrical flourish. "After you," he said, voice smooth, casual, yet with a subtle undertone of challenge, as if daring her to be herself in this world she had never entered. Clara stepped in, taking in the elegance, the tall windows, the soft rugs, the artful arrangement of books and vases, the faint scent of fresh roses. She turned to him, eyes wide, and whispered, "This is overwhelming?" he offered, smiling. "Yes, exactly that." She laughed, nervously brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The sound was light, genuine, and somehow caught him off guard. Julianne realized he hadn't heard a laugh like that, authentic, unguarded, spontaneous, in years. As they settled in, the conversation drifted toward mundane details, yet every word carried weight. Clara asked about his travels, careful not to sound intrusive, and Julian answered in a way that was open enough to intrigue, but closed enough to maintain mystery. They laughed over a shared misunderstanding about Parisian transportation, a bus that ran on an unusual schedule, a taxi that nearly cut them off. And in the laughter, the tension of earlier awkwardness began to dissolve. By the time they stepped onto the streets, Paris had transformed into something magical. The city smelled of freshly baked bread, coffee, and faint floral perfumes drifting from open windows. Clara found herself walking just slightly behind Julian, studying the way his tailored jacket moved as he navigated the narrow streets with quiet confidence. There was a rhythm to him, a certainty, that contrasted sharply with her own tentative steps. Yet despite that, or perhaps because of it, her pulse quickened in ways she hadn't anticipated. They paused at a small cafe along the Seine, tables spilling into the street. Julian gestured toward a table tucked under an awning. "Shall we?" he asked. Clara hesitated, suddenly conscious of her attire. Comfortable flats, worn coat, but the smile he gave her, patient and slightly teasing, made her sit. As they ordered, the waiter, discreet and professional, left them alone, the soft murmur of the cafe wrapping around them like a cocoon. Julian studied her subtly over the rim of his coffee cup. She was nervous, yes, but there was an elegance in the way she carried herself, an understated confidence he found intriguing. And Clara, for her part, found herself drawn not only to the opulence surrounding her, but to the quiet strength in his presence. He didn't push, didn't flaunt. He merely existed in a way that made her feel both seen and safe, a rare combination. Their first walk along the Seine, hands brushing occasionally, was punctuated by moments of silence that spoke volumes, a shared glance at a pair of street performers, the way he handed her a scarf when the wind picked up. These small gestures layered meaning upon meaning, each one a tiny spark igniting a slow, smoldering connection. The first emotional collision happened when Julian, noticing her hesitation at crossing a particularly busy street, extended his hand, not in a commanding way, but in a gesture that was at once protective and gentle. Clara looked up at him, startled, cheeks flushing, and accepted the gesture. For a heartbeat, their fingers lingered, the faint pressure electric. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The city around them blurred. It was just this contact, this moment, this unspoken acknowledgement that something was unfolding far beyond ordinary expectations. Later, as the sun dipped fully and Paris glimmered with the golden haze of street lamps and shop lights, they stumbled upon a small bridge over the Seine. Julian leaned on the railing, watching the water ripple below. Clara stood beside him, hesitant at first, but then slowly letting the cool evening breeze play with her hair. "You've never seen anything like this?" he asked, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "No, nothing like this," she admitted. Her eyes met his, and for a fleeting second, the world seemed suspended. She realized how surreal the day had been, from hospital corridors to a private jet, to a city alive with history and light, and now standing here,
a stranger in a world that felt impossibly vast, yet intimate, next to a man she barely knew, yet inexplicably trusted. Julien tilted his head, studying her. "You're remarkable," he said softly, a statement without pressure, but weighty enough to make her pulse skip. Clara's stomach fluttered and she quickly looked away, cheeks burning, pretending to be distracted by the reflections in the water. In that moment, the emotional spark ignited fully. They weren't just two people thrown together by chance. They were two lives intersecting at the perfect point of vulnerability and curiosity. The unspoken question lingered between them. What if this was more than an accident? What if this was the beginning of something neither had dared to imagine? As they walked back toward the hotel, lights twinkling on the streets, cafes buzzing softly with evening patrons, Clara found herself laughing freely for the first time in weeks. Julien noticed, his gaze lingering not in judgment, but in quiet admiration. The day had begun in chaos, a mistake in boarding a jet, and yet here they were, two hearts orbiting the same uncharted path, drawn together by curiosity, laughter, and the faint thrill of possibility. The evening ended with a quiet dinner in the suite, the soft glow of Parisian night filtering through sheer curtains. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite books, fleeting dreams. There was a tension beneath it, yes.
The next morning, Paris woke slowly beneath a misty haze. Street lamps reflected on slick cobblestones, and the faint aroma of freshly baked croissants drifted through open cafe windows. Clara awoke in her hotel room, sunlight cutting through sheer curtains, feeling a flutter of excitement, but also a gnawing tension. Her thoughts raced. Was she really supposed to be here? She was a nurse from a small town, exhausted from hospital shifts and endless responsibility, and yet here she was, sharing a suite with a man whose life seemed painted in gold. Breakfast in the suite was quiet. Julien poured coffee with precise movements, eyes flicking to her occasionally, curiosity hidden behind a mask of calm. Clara stirred her cup, fingers tracing the rim, avoiding his gaze. She had laughed, touched, and leaned into him yesterday, but now, with daylight exposing reality, a creeping doubt settled in. "I thought you might like some fresh croissants," Julien said casually, as if he hadn't noticed her inner turmoil. The gesture was small, but in the silence between them it spoke volumes. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," she murmured, voice light but guarded. As they ate, an awkward tension hung in the air, unspoken but thick. Julien wanted to ask her about the flight, the sudden whirlwind of yesterday, but he sensed her need for space. Instead, he offered small observations about Paris, the way sunlight bounced off the Seine, the charm of the cafes, a hidden park with statues carved in stone. Clara nodded, sometimes smiling, but her mind kept wandering back to her own world, the hospital, her family, her predictable life. Later, when Julien suggested a walk along Rue de Rivoli, Clara hesitated. I don't know if I should, she said, a tightness in her chest. I'm not really used to this. Julien's lips curved into a faint, amused smile. Used to what? He asked gently. Luxury? Attention? Or simply not having control? Clara blinked, surprised by the accuracy of his words. All of it, she admitted finally. I don't even know if I belong here. I feel like an intruder in a world that isn't mine. Julien studied her, his expression softening. He knew the feeling well, the isolation, the sense that even when surrounded by people or wealth, something essential remained out of reach. Maybe the world isn't ready for you, he said carefully, but it seems you're ready for it. She laughed nervously, a little bitter. Ready? I can barely navigate the streets without getting lost. And yesterday, boarding your jet by mistake, that wasn't exactly grace under pressure. That wasn't a mistake, Julien said quietly,
almost to himself. Clara's head snapped up. "What?" she asked, startled. He shrugged slightly, a faint smirk playing at his lips. Sometimes mistakes lead to interesting outcomes. His eyes held hers for a moment too long. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but quickly looked away, unsure how to respond. The rest of the morning passed with a mix of exploration and unease. They visited the Luxembourg Gardens, watched the swans glide across the pond, and admired the fountains. Yet Clara remained hesitant. Every casual touch, every glance from Julien felt loaded. She wanted to reach out, to trust, to laugh freely. But a voice inside whispered, "This isn't your world. You don't belong here." Julien sensed it too. He saw the way her fingers twitched nervously when their hands brushed, the subtle recoil in her posture when he leaned slightly closer to speak. He understood the walls she had built, walls of humility, fear, and self-protection, and he respected them, mostly, but inside, a quiet frustration simmered. Why is it always so hard to let someone in?
Julien noticed immediately. "Don't mind him," he whispered, brushing a reassuring hand over hers. Clara pulled back subtly, flustered by the intimacy and the attention. She forced a smile, murmuring, "It's fine, really," but inside the familiar doubt gnawed at her. By midday, Clara found herself retreating emotionally, keeping her answers brief, her laughter muted. Julien noticed frustration mounting behind his calm exterior. He was used to control over meetings, over negotiations, over outcomes, but he couldn't control her reactions, couldn't pull her out of her hesitation without risking pushing her away. They stopped at a bridge overlooking the Seine, the sunlight reflecting off the rippling water. Julien leaned against the railing, casually observing the city, but Clara's attention was inward. She traced the railing with her fingers, heart racing from both admiration and anxiety. She started, then stopped herself. Words failed her. Julien turned, waiting patiently. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "But you could." She shook her head, swallowing hard. I don't want to ruin whatever this is. I feel like I don't belong in this story." Julien exhaled, a mix of amusement and exasperation in his expression. "You think this is a story?" he asked. "Maybe it is, but stories are made of unexpected chapters, and this one isn't ruined yet, not unless you decide it is." Clara bit her lip, unsure whether to feel comforted or guilty. She wanted to let go, to step fully into this experience, but fear held her back. The fear of disappointment, of being exposed, of stepping too far beyond the life she knew. The afternoon brought more moments of tension. Julien attempted light teasing, trying to break through her self-imposed walls, but Clara's responses were clipped, defensive. Even a small compliment about her eyes made her blush and deflect, muttering something about needing coffee or fresh air. Julien's patience was tested, yet he remained poised, observing, waiting for her to meet him halfway. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of gold and lavender, Clara finally stopped near a quiet cafe. She leaned against a lamppost, exhaling sharply. Julien approached slowly, giving her space, but staying within reach. "You don't have to decide everything right now, but you can't hide forever either. Not from me, and not from yourself." Her throat tightened, and for a moment the city noise faded, the honking, the chatter, the distant music. It was just the two of them, two people grappling with the tension between desire and fear, attraction and pride. I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I belong in this world of yours." Julien's eyes held hers, steady and unwavering. "Then perhaps you belong in a different world," he said softly, "one where you decide what belongs and what doesn't. And maybe that world includes me." Clara looked away, uncertainty warring with the thrill of possibility. The spark from their first day burned quietly, but now it was tempered with resistance, doubt, and the careful protection of fragile hearts. Neither wanted to hurt the other, but both were learning that love, even the unexpected kind, was never without challenge. That evening, as they returned to the hotel, the tension remained, like a coiled spring. Julien's patience and Clara's self-restraint created a push and pull, a delicate dance of desire, fear, and unspoken longing. For Clara, resistance was rooted in humility and fear. Fear of inadequacy, fear of judgment, fear of leaving the life she knew. For Julien, resistance was subtle, frustration with her hesitation, tempered by admiration for her integrity and authenticity. The day ended not with a confession, not with a declaration, but with a quiet understanding. Something had been lit between them, a spark that neither could ignore. Yet both were aware that crossing the next threshold, trusting fully, surrendering to the unknown, would require courage neither had fully found.
The day began with a drizzle. Paris shrouded in a soft gray mist that made the city feel like a watercolor painting in motion. Clara tugged her coat tighter around her shoulders, shivering despite the warmth of her layers. She had insisted on walking to a nearby art gallery, an attempt to immerse herself in the city, to reclaim some independence, but fate, as always, had other plans. A sudden downpour sent pedestrians scattering, umbrellas blooming like bright mushrooms along the wet streets. Clara tried to sprint for cover, only to slip on slip cobblestones. Julien, who had been a few steps ahead, spun around instinctively and caught her arm, steadying her before she fell. "Careful," he said, pulling her closer under his coat for warmth. His voice, calm and teasing, did little to mask the concern in his eyes. I'm fine," Clara stammered, cheeks flushing, not from the chill, but from the sudden intimacy. She tried to wriggle out from under his coat, but the relentless rain made escape impossible. Julien simply held her in place, the slight heat of their proximity both comforting and unnerving. "Fine doesn't usually involve slipping on cobblestones," he said, tone lightly scolding, but there was a softness to it that made her heart flutter. "We need shelter, or you'll catch a cold." They ducked into a narrow doorway of a small, unassuming cafe. The warm air enveloped them immediately, scented with coffee, baked pastries, and the faint undertone of vanilla from candles flickering on nearby tables. The cafe was cozy, intimate, with only a few other patrons quietly sipping their drinks, lost in their own worlds. Clara breathed deeply, savoring the sudden safety. She felt embarrassed. Her usual composed self had melted under the rain, and now she was sitting inches from a man whose life she had barely begun to understand. Yet Julien remained poised, his calm presence grounding her, his occasional glances reassuring rather than intrusive. "We should order something," he suggested, nodding toward the counter. Clara nodded silently, feeling the awkward tension of their proximity settle over them like a delicate veil. As they waited for their drinks, Julien's eyes roamed the small cafe, taking in the worn wooden chairs, the cheerful chatter of Parisians, and the soft light spilling across the floor. Then, subtly, his gaze shifted to Clara, studying the way her fingers twisted in her lap, the faint tremor of her hand as she adjusted her scarf, the slight hesitation in her smile. He noticed all these things, the fragile layers that made her human, approachable, and compelling. "You're quieter than yesterday," he said, not as an accusation, but as an observation. "Rain doesn't usually make people reflective, does it?" Clara looked up, startled by his insight. She opened her mouth to respond, then paused, unsure if she wanted to reveal the truth. I suppose it does," she said, cautiously,
eyes flicking toward the counter. Julian tilted his head slightly, waiting, not pushing, but letting the pause hang between them. In that silence, Clara realized that his presence wasn't just about charm or wealth. It was about attention, careful and deliberate, the kind that made her feel seen without pressure. When the drinks arrived, coffee for him, tea for her, they settled at a small corner table, forced together by the cafe's layout. Neither had much choice in proximity, and the space between them felt charged. Clara found herself nervously tracing the rim of her cup, Julian watching quietly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I've never been in a situation like this," she confessed softly. "Sharing a table, hiding from the rain with someone I hardly know. It's unusual." He chuckled lightly, the sound low and intimate. "Unusual can be good," he said. "It means you're alive to possibilities. It means the world is not fully predictable." Clara's heart fluttered at the words. "Alive to possibilities," she repeated, tasting the phrase like it was foreign and thrilling. I like that." For the next hour, the conversation drifted seamlessly from one topic to another. Books, travel, childhood memories, and favorite Parisian cafes. They found themselves laughing easily, the earlier resistance softening in the warmth of shared space. Julian noticed how Clara's eyes sparkled when she described her favorite book, how her hands animated the story in small, expressive gestures. Julian noticed his gentle teasing, the way he allowed himself to be vulnerable in tiny admissions, like preferring quiet walks over gala events, enjoying ordinary moments despite his extraordinary life.
When the rain finally eased, they stepped back into the damp Parisian streets, the air fragrant with wet stone and blooming flowers. Julian offered his arm, a subtle gesture of courtesy and connection. Clara hesitated, then placed her hand lightly in his. The small act, so ordinary in appearance, carried immense emotional weight, a surrender to proximity, to trust, to the possibility of closeness. Their walk led them to the Pont Neuf, the oldest standing bridge in Paris, where the Seine shimmered beneath them. Julian leaned against the railing, Clara beside him, both gazing at the water. The city hummed softly around them, but here, in this suspended moment, they were alone. "Funny," Clara said, breaking the silence. "I imagined Paris would feel different, bigger somehow, not like this." Julian looked at her, curiosity softened with amusement. "Bigger in what way?" "Bigger and lonely. I thought it would overwhelm me, like I'd be swallowed by its grandeur. But right now, with you here, it doesn't feel that way. It feels possible." Julian's eyes softened, and he reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "Possible," he repeated quietly. "Yes, that's the right word." For a heartbeat, they lingered there, fingers brushing, eyes locking. Then a sudden drizzle started again, soft and teasing, forcing them to laugh and run toward shelter, a nearby cafe terrace this time. Clara's laughter rang out freely, and Julian's smile widened. The sight of her delight ignited something he hadn't expected, a longing for ordinary happiness wrapped in extraordinary circumstances. Forced together by rain, space, and circumstance, they discovered subtle layers of intimacy, shared umbrellas, laughter in awkward situations, the casual brush of hands when passing pastries. Every small moment deepened the emotional current between them, even as they each wrestled with fear, Clara's fear of inadequacy, Julian's fear of being too vulnerable. By evening, they returned to the hotel, soaked but exhilarated. Julian offered a towel, and Clara allowed herself a rare moment of surrender, letting him dry her hair with a quiet intimacy that neither had spoken of, but both understood. Sitting together in the suite afterward, she wrapped herself in the towel, feeling the warmth linger, not just from the fabric, but from the closeness, the shared laughter, the unspoken connection that had grown stronger through the day's forced proximity. Julian noticed, as he poured them both a glass of wine, how Clara's guard had softened slightly, how her earlier resistance was giving way to tentative trust. Yet he also sensed her hesitation, the careful pacing of her emotions. He smiled faintly, silently promising patience. And Clara, sitting across from him, caught herself imagining what it might feel like to step fully into this unpredictable adventure. Not just the city, not just the luxury, but the man who had entered her world by chance and refused to leave. In the quiet of the suite, as Paris lights twinkled through the window, the truth became undeniable. Proximity had forced their worlds together, stripping away pretenses and resistance. The spark from their first encounter had not only endured, it had grown into a current strong enough to carry them forward, and neither wanted to fight it anymore.
The morning light spilled into the suite, painting the room in soft gold. Clara woke to the faint hum of Paris outside and the subtle scent of coffee Julienne had already prepared. She wrapped herself in the hotel robe and padded quietly to the small balcony, the Seine shimmering beneath the early sun. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, and her mind wandered, inevitably, to the life she had left behind in the hospital. Clara's story had never been one of luxury or ease. Born in a modest town, she had watched her parents struggle to make ends meet. Her father, a bus driver with calloused hands and a gentle smile, had died when she was just 14, leaving her mother to juggle 2 jobs while raising Clara and her younger brother. Clara had promised herself then that she would always care for others, that she would carry the burden of responsibility without complaint. And she had. Her nursing career had been a calling and a cage. Long hours, emotional exhaustion, endless crises. It was where she felt most alive, but also most alone. Relationships had been fleeting. There was no room for romance in a life dictated by shifts, on-call nights, and hospital bureaucracy. She had grown used to the pattern: work hard, care for others, keep personal longing tightly locked away. And yet, in Julienne, she saw something stirring, something she hadn't felt in years, the possibility that life could be both chaotic and beautiful, intimate and grand. Julienne entered the balcony quietly, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You always wake up early," he observed, handing her 1 cup. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, a mixture of curiosity and something softer, admiration perhaps, though he wouldn't admit it aloud. "I like mornings," she said softly. "They're quiet. They give me time before the chaos begins." Her fingers curled around the warm mug, the steam fogging her glasses slightly. He leaned against the railing, studying the river and then her. "Chaos?" he asked gently. "You mean life?" She nodded, hesitant, yet the openness in his tone made her willing to speak, at least a little. "I've spent most of my life caring for others, family, patients, anyone who needed me. I've rarely had time to think about myself." She paused, eyes tracing the Seine below, water shimmering like fragmented memories. "And sometimes I wonder if that's enough, if I've done enough from myself to deserve this." Julien's expression softened. He understood. He had built walls around himself with wealth, influence, and control. A childhood of privilege had been overshadowed by expectation, his father's constant pressure to succeed, the loneliness of being groomed for responsibility before he could even define himself. He had learned to hide desire beneath perfection, to equate success with worth. And yet Clara's presence was a mirror, reflecting the parts of him he had long ignored, the craving for simplicity, vulnerability, and connection. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I've spent my life creating control, planning everything, measuring worth in numbers, meetings, and appearances. And still, something has always been missing." His voice faltered slightly, the admission rare and almost reckless. Clara's head snapped up, surprised. "You missing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
Julien glanced at her, a faint shadow crossing his sharp features. Connection, authenticity, moments that aren't calculated or convenient. I've realized recently that I don't want to live behind walls anymore. But walls are hard to dismantle. Clara's hand gripped the balcony railing, heart racing. For the first time, she saw Julien not as a billionaire, not as a figure of opulence and mystery, but someone human, someone shaped by fear, loss, and longing, someone who, like her, had learned to survive by containing emotions. They were silent for a moment, the city around them alive with the soft clatter of morning life, but neither spoke. The weight of shared vulnerability hung in the air. Later, as they wandered through the Musée d'Arceau, the grandeur of Impressionist art offering a quiet backdrop, Julien shared more of his story. He spoke of his childhood in a grand Parisian apartment, the pressure to perform academically, the loneliness hidden behind wealth and privilege. Clara listened, captivated, not by the tales of money or influence, but the human truth beneath them, the longing, the mistakes, the small rebellions he had never allowed himself until now. I spent so long defining myself by others' expectations that I forgot who I was supposed to be, what I wanted. And now it's disorienting, but exhilarating to rediscover that. Clara nodded, feeling an unexpected kinship. I know that feeling, she said softly. Not with wealth, but with responsibility. I've spent so long caring for others, I forgot I could even care for myself, or let someone in. A moment of silence followed, each lost in reflection. Then, in a museum café, Julien gestured to a small table tucked near the window. You trust easily with your patients, but you don't trust with yourself, he said softly, his eyes meeting hers.
Clara swallowed, the words hitting with quiet precision. It's instinct, she murmured. I can't just let go, not when everything I've built depends on responsibility. Yet here you are, he said, leaning forward slightly, in Paris, with me. Somehow you're letting go a little. She smiled faintly, a blush coloring her cheeks. Maybe, a little. The rest of the day carried this tension. They walked along the Seine, visited small bookshops, and shared quiet moments in hidden cafes. Each encounter offered small windows into their pasts. Julien's childhood letters from a distant boarding school, Clara's diaries from nursing school, her sketches of dream vacations she had never taken. With each revelation, their bonds strengthened, but so did the stakes. By evening, they returned to the suite, exhausted and exhilarated. The city shimmered beneath them, lights reflecting like scattered stars on the Seine. Julien poured them both a glass of wine, the silence filled with unspoken understanding. You've shared so much today, Julien said, softly, voice low. I feel honored, and yet I know I've only scratched the surface. Clara's heart ached, touched by his sincerity. I know, and I feel the same. But I also feel something I've never felt before. Safe, understood, seen. Julien's lips curved into a faint smile. That's rare, he admitted. And it's why what we're doing, matters. It's fragile, yes, but it's real. Clara nodded, eyes misting slightly. Fragile, yes, but worth it, perhaps. As night fell, they sat together by the window, Paris spread beneath them in a quiet sea of lights. The shared vulnerabilities, the unveiled pasts, had pulled them closer than ever, but they both knew the road ahead would challenge them. The next step required trust, courage, and a willingness to confront not only each other's fears, but their own. Yet for the first time, the future felt possible.
not rigidly controlled, not limited by past mistakes, but open, fragile, and waiting to be written together.
The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of their suite, painting the room in a soft, golden glow. Clara stirred awake to the sound of soft French music drifting from Julian's phone. She found him in the kitchenette, humming as he prepared breakfast, a surprisingly domestic scene that made her smile. "You make it look too easy," she said, half teasing, half admiring. Julian glanced up, smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Easy?" he asked. "Cooking breakfast? Not even close. But I like to start the day with something tangible, something I can create." Clara leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely, taking in the scene. Julian, the billionaire, meticulously flipping eggs and arranging toast on plates as if orchestrating a small symphony. The sight was both grounding and disarming. He caught her gaze and raised an eyebrow. "You're smiling," he noted, voice gentle. "I'm impressed," she admitted, laughing lightly. "I didn't know billionaires could make eggs." "It's a hidden talent," he replied, offering her a plate, "but don't expect a cooking show." They ate together, the conversation flowing naturally, peppered with small jokes and shared observations about Parisian mornings. Clara found herself relaxing, the earlier tension melting into quiet enjoyment. Julian's presence was no longer intimidating. It was comforting, like a safe harbor amid unfamiliar streets and experiences. Later, they ventured out into the city, wandering aimlessly through the Marais district. The narrow streets, lined with centuries-old buildings, held a charm that was both timeless and intimate. Julian pointed out a hidden courtyard, its cobblestones damp from a morning drizzle, and led her inside. A small cafe sat tucked between flowering window boxes, tables adorned with lace tablecloths and flickering candles even in daylight. "This place is perfect," Clara whispered, captivated by the quaint setting. "It's a secret," Julian said, his eyes glinting mischievously. "Few tourists know about it." They sat, sipping coffee and sharing a plate of buttery pastries. Conversation flowed freely now, unburdened by hesitation. Clara told stories from the hospital, small triumphs, quiet losses, and moments of unexpected humor. Julian listened intently, occasionally asking questions, his genuine interest warming her more than the coffee ever could. "You have this way of seeing the world," he said softly, leaning forward. "Even in chaos, you notice details, small joys. It's remarkable." Clara's cheeks warmed, not from flattery, but from the sincerity in his voice. "I notice because I have to," she admitted. "You can't care for people if you don't see them, but it's exhausting sometimes." "I can imagine," he said quietly, "yet you still manage to smile, to care. It's inspiring." The afternoon unfolded like a gentle melody. They wandered through art galleries, their fingers brushing occasionally, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. At one gallery, Julian paused before a painting of a quiet Parisian street, its colors soft and muted. "Do you ever feel like life is a painting?" he asked, voice low. "Like all these moments, ordinary, fleeting, they create something larger than ourselves?" Clara considered the question. "Yes," she said slowly, "especially now. Each day, each small decision, it adds color, depth, and meaning. I never realized how beautiful it could feel." Julian's eyes softened. "I've spent so long chasing structure, control, I forgot to let life just exist." He glanced at her, a faint vulnerability in his gaze. "And now you've reminded me." They left the gallery, strolling along the Seine as the sun began to dip toward evening. The golden light shimmered on the water, painting reflections that danced like memories across the rippling surface. Julian extended his hand. Clara hesitated, then placed hers in his. The touch was simple, but it carried warmth, trust, and a growing sense of intimacy.
"You've changed something in me," he murmured, voice low, almost vulnerable. "A part I didn't know could still feel ordinary happiness." Clara's pulse quickened. "And you've reminded me," she said softly, "that it's okay to step out of my routine, to experience joy without guilt." The evening brought them to a small Parisian bistro. Candles flickered on the tables, and the soft murmur of conversations created a cocoon around them. Over dinner, they laughed at shared missteps, Clara accidentally knocking over a water glass, Julian struggling with French menu items, and discovered shared quirks, like their love for absurdly specific pastries or their habit of humming when lost in thought. Julian reached across the table, brushing a crumb from her sleeve. Clara caught his hand, letting it linger a moment longer than necessary. Their laughter faded into a quiet comfort, an acknowledgement that the day had shifted something fundamental in both of them. Walking back to the hotel, the city lights twinkling around them, they stopped on a small bridge overlooking the Seine. Julian leaned on the railing, Clara beside him. Neither spoke immediately. The quiet hum of the city was enough. Then, almost imperceptibly, Julian reached her hand. This time she didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a silent promise that the bond between them was deepening. No words were needed. The touch said everything: trust, connection, and the fragile courage to step closer to one another. Back in the suite, they shared a quiet evening. Julian poured them both a glass of wine, and they settled near the window, watching the Parisian night shimmer below. Clara rested her head lightly against his shoulder, a gesture of trust and comfort. Julian, for his part, felt a rare peace, a slowing of the world's constant demands. For the first time since their accidental meeting on the jet, both allowed themselves to fully exist in the moment, present, open, and vulnerable. Laughter, conversation, and gentle touches replaced hesitation. The emotional spark from earlier had blossomed into a warm, tentative intimacy. Clara reflected quietly. "I've never felt this safe, this understood, even in my own life." Julian's thoughts mirrored hers. "I've spent years controlling everything, but she makes me want to let go, to simply be. And that is terrifying and beautiful." The night ended not with declarations, but with a quiet understanding. Something fragile and real had grown between them. It was a bond rooted not just in attraction, but in shared vulnerability, trust, and the willingness to step closer to one another.
Paris had never felt colder. A gray sky hung over the city, and a biting wind cut through the narrow streets. Clara pulled her coat tighter, her mind in turmoil. She had just received a text from her mother, a simple message that carried the weight of home. "Are you sure about this? Don't forget who you are." The words gnawed at her. She loved her family fiercely, and the thought of betraying her own sense of self by getting swept away in a world so different from hers terrified her. Julian, meanwhile, was waiting at the hotel, unaware that Clara had been wrestling with doubt, guilt, and fear. Their morning had started beautifully. They strolled along the Seine, laughing over small jokes and sharing intimate stories. But the afternoon brought tension. Julian had arranged a surprise, a private dinner on a rooftop overlooking the city lights. He had planned everything meticulously, hoping to create a moment that would solidify their bond. But Clara, consumed by the message and her own insecurities, hesitated. I don't know if tonight is a good idea," she said quietly, staring at her shoes. Julian paused, confused. "Why not? It's just us. No distractions, no expectations, just dinner and the city." Clara's voice wavered. "It's too much. I don't know if I belong in your world, Julian. I feel like I'm losing myself, and I'm scared." Julian's brow furrowed, hurt flashing briefly in his eyes. "Your world? Clara, your world is as valid, as important as mine. Don't ever think otherwise." She shook her head, tears threatening to fall. "It's not the same. You live in a life I could never imagine. Every day I spend with you, I feel out of place, like I'm just a guest in a story that isn't mine." Julian's jaw tightened. "And yet, you chose to be here. You didn't have to. You made that choice." "I don't know if I can keep making that choice," Clara snapped, frustration spilling over. "I feel like I'm losing myself, like I'm floating in someone else's world, and I can't breathe." Julian's eyes darkened, hurt flashing briefly in his eyes. "Clara, I've been patient. I've given you space. I've respected your fears. But this sudden withdrawal, this anger, it doesn't make sense. After everything we've shared, how can you doubt what's between us?" The words hit her like a cold wind. I don't doubt you," she whispered, voice trembling. "I doubt myself. I doubt my ability to belong, to fit in, to not ruin everything." Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Clara, love isn't about perfection or fitting in. It's about honesty, about showing up even when you're afraid. If you keep running, you'll never know what this could be." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. I need time. I can't do this tonight. I can't do this." The air between them thickened, heavy with unsaid words and emotional weight. Julian wanted to reach for her, to pull her into a hug and show her she belonged. But he also recognized that pushing too hard could shatter the fragile trust they had built. Instead, he stepped back, the pain of restraint cutting deep. "Then I'll wait," he said quietly, voice tight with emotion. "But don't think that waiting is infinite. I won't force you. I'll respect your choice. But know this, Clara, I care for you more than I can say, and it hurts to see you retreat from what could be beautiful." Clara's shoulders shook as she turned to look at him, heart aching. I care for you too," she admitted, voice barely audible, "more than I should. But I'm scared of losing myself, of losing you." Julian stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. "You won't lose yourself," he said softly. "You'll find parts of yourself you didn't know existed, with me. But only if you trust me and yourself." The moment hung between them, fragile and fraught. Then, outside, a sudden commotion drew their attention. A street performer had dropped a small cart of instruments, and the clang echoed down the narrow street. The distraction broke the spell, and Clara, feeling overwhelmed, pulled back. I can't," she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "I'm sorry, Julian. I just can't do this." Julian's heart tightened, a sharp pang of helplessness cutting through him. "Clara," he began, reaching out again, but she shook her head. Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her figure retreating down the rain-slicked street. Julian stood frozen, the weight of silence pressing against him. The distance between them was not just physical, it was emotional, a chasm carved by fear, misunderstanding, and the cruel timing of vulnerability. That night, Julian sat alone in the suite, replaying their argument in his mind. He remembered her tears, the way her voice trembled, the desperate fear in her eyes. His chest ached, not for pride, but for the fragility of their connection, the possibility that a single moment of resistance could undo everything. Clara, on her side of the city, in a small hotel, lay awake, heart racing. She loved him, of that she was certain, but the weight of self-doubt and fear had overwhelmed her. She questioned every choice, every feeling, and every step she had taken toward him. Am I foolish? Am I overstepping? Am I destined to ruin something beautiful? The nights stretched endlessly, each of them haunted by the other's absence. It was a shatter point, a moment of truth where love and fear collided, where trust and pride wrestled, and where the fragility of connection became painfully clear. Neither slept well. Julian's thoughts oscillated between worry, frustration, and longing, while Clara wrestled with guilt, fear, and the undeniable pull of her heart toward him.
The city of light felt dimmed, the romance of Paris shadowed by uncertainty. And yet, beneath the pain, a quiet ember remained, small, flickering, but alive. It was the spark of what had formed between them: trust, laughter, vulnerability, and shared experience. The shatter had happened, yes, but it was not irreversible. Both knew deep down that the next steps required courage, more courage than either had summoned so far. Julian would need to bridge the distance with patience and understanding. Clara would need to confront her fear of losing herself, allowing trust to overcome doubt. In this lowest emotional moment, the stage was set for reckoning, the choice between pride and vulnerability, avoidance and connection. The shatter had happened, yes, but it was not irreversible. Both knew, deep down, that the next steps required courage, more courage than either had summoned so far. Julian would need to bridge the distance with patience and understanding. Clara would need to confront her fear of losing herself, allowing trust to overcome doubt. In this lowest emotional moment, the stage was set for reckoning, the choice between pride and vulnerability, avoidance and connection. The shatter had happened, yes, but the heart of the story, the possibility of love, still pulsed beneath the surface, waiting to be claimed.
The following morning dawned quiet and cool over Paris. The city seemed subdued, as though it sensed the tension that lingered between Clara and Julian. Neither had slept well. The memory of the previous night, the harsh words, the retreat, the silence, hung over them like a heavy fog. Clara sat by the window of her small hotel room, the soft sunlight reflecting off the Seine in the distance. She clutched her coffee cup tightly, staring at the rippling water below. The warmth seeped into her hands, but it did nothing to quiet the storm in her heart. Every fiber of her being longed to run back to Julian, to apologize, to confess that her fear had almost sabotaged what she truly wanted. Yet pride, doubt, and habit held her in place. "I can't let myself lose myself again," she thought, "but I can't deny what I feel, not for him, not for me." Her phone buzzed. A single message from Julian. "Meet me at the Pont Neuf at noon. I won't pressure you. I'll just wait." Clara's breath caught. The simplicity of the message, the patience in it, was both a balm and a challenge. She stared at it for a long moment, heart hammering. Then, with trembling hands, she set the phone down and whispered to herself, "I have to try." Meanwhile, Julian had left the suite early, pacing along the cobblestone streets near the Pont Neuf. His mind replayed every interaction, every word, every glance from Clara. He had loved patience, valued control, but now he realized that waiting without acting was a form of surrender he could not afford. He had to show her, through action, through presence, through vulnerability, that she was worth the risk. Noon arrived, and Clara approached the bridge cautiously, her steps hesitant. Julian was already there, leaning against the railing, eyes scanning the crowd as though anticipating her arrival. When their eyes met, an unspoken recognition passed between them, a mixture of relief, longing, and quiet fear. She stopped a few feet away, heart racing. "Julian," she began, voice catching. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. "Clara," he said softly, "I waited for you. No demands, no lectures, just me, waiting, because I believe in what we have. But you have to choose too. This is your choice." Her hands trembled, and she took a deep breath. "I was scared," she admitted, "scared of losing myself, scared of failing you, failing us. But I've realized something. I can't let fear dictate my life. Not with you, not now." Julian's eyes softened, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Then, what's your choice?" She stepped closer, closing the gap between them, letting the cool breeze carry away the lingering doubt. "My choice is you, us. I want to take the risk. I want to trust,
and I want to be with you." Relief, mingled with overwhelming emotion, washed over Julian. He reached for her hands, holding them firmly yet gently. "Clara, you don't know how much I needed to hear that. I promise I'll do everything to make this simple, real, and ours. No pretense, no walls, just us." A faint smile broke across her face, tears glimmering at her eyes. I believe you." The bridge seemed to shrink around them, the bustle of the city fading into insignificance. They stood together, hands entwined, hearts racing, yet grounded by the shared understanding that they had chosen each other, despite fear, doubt, and uncertainty.
Julian stepped even closer, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "I've never asked for anything like this," he admitted, voice low and intimate. "But I've never known anyone like you either, and I'm not letting go." Clara's voice was barely audible, but her eyes spoke volumes. "Neither am I." They walked together along the Seine, slower now, savoring the physical closeness and the emotional release. Every glance, every touch, every shared laugh was a testament to the courage it had taken to choose vulnerability over fear. They stopped at a small cafe nestled against the water's edge and sat across from each other. Julian reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Do you remember our first accidental meeting?" he asked, a playful smile in his eyes. Clara chuckled softly, a sound full of warmth and relief. "How could I forget? I was terrified, and you were so calm, so confident, and I had no idea what I was walking into." Julian laughed lightly. "And yet, here we are. Not by accident anymore, I hope." "No," she said firmly, squeezing his hand. "Not an accident, a choice." The cafe seemed to fade around them, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of warmth, laughter, and quiet intimacy. They spoke of Paris, of dreams, of small joys, and even mundane things that suddenly felt significant because they were shared. For Clara, the freedom to express herself fully, without fear of judgment, was exhilarating. For Julian, the chance to embrace life without walls and to truly connect with someone was liberating. Hours passed in effortless conversation until the sun dipped low, painting the Seine with gold and amber reflections. Julian stood, offering his arm again. Clara took it, a gesture that had once felt intimidating but now felt natural. Together they walked toward the hotel, the city alive around them, yet secondary to the bond they had chosen to nurture. Back in the suite, they shared a quiet dinner, laughing at small mishaps, teasing each other gently, and savoring the simple joy of being present. Julian reached for her hand mid-bite, and she met his gaze, heart swelling with trust and affection. Later, as they sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer on the river, Julian whispered, "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know this. I'll choose you every day, Clara. Even when it's hard, even when it's frightening, I'll choose us." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "And I'll choose you," she whispered. "Even when fear comes, even when doubt creeps in, I'll choose you." The city of Paris continued to shimmer outside, lights reflecting the choices they had made, the courage they had summoned, and the love that had bloomed in the space between fear and trust. For the first time, both felt whole, connected, and ready to face whatever came next, together.
The morning air in Paris was crisp, filled with the faint aroma of fresh pastries and the distant hum of city life. Clara awoke with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years, her heart lighter, her spirit freer. Julien was already up, standing by the balcony with a cup of coffee in hand, looking out at the Seine. The city shimmered beneath the morning sun, each ripple reflecting the hope and possibility of a new beginning. "Good morning," she whispered, stepping beside him, her hand brushing against his. He turned, eyes soft and warm. "Morning," he replied, voice low, intimate. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted, smiling. "I feel at peace." Julien's smile widened, a quiet triumph in his expression. "That's good. You deserve it, Clara, and I'll do everything I can to make sure you keep feeling it." They stood together, shoulders touching, watching Paris awaken. The city felt alive, but this time its energy was different, soft, promising, and in sync with their own emotions. No longer was it a backdrop for fleeting moments or uncertain encounters. It was a witness to their choice, to their courage, and to the love they had nurtured through trials and vulnerability. Later, they wandered along the cobblestone streets, holding hands as they explored the hidden corners of the city. Each street, each café, each quiet courtyard seemed imbued with significance, as though Paris itself celebrated their newfound connection. They laughed freely, sharing playful jabs and teasing comments that revealed how comfortable they had become with one another. At a small market, Julien handed Clara a bouquet of wildflowers. She took them, eyes misting slightly, touched by the simplicity of the gesture. "Why these?" she asked softly, inhaling the sweet fragrance. "Because they," he said, lifting her hand to his lips in a brief, tender kiss, "are beautiful, spontaneous, and real, just like us." Clara's heart swelled. I think I'm ready," she whispered, "to let life be spontaneous. With you." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then we'll do it together. No walls, no pretense, just us, learning, exploring, and living." The day unfolded in a series of quiet joys. They picnicked in the Luxembourg Gardens, lying on the grass and watching clouds drift lazily across the sky. Julien shared stories from his childhood, this time light-hearted and humorous, allowing Clara glimpses of the boy behind the man. She shared memories from her nursing days, her eyes lighting up as she recounted moments of triumph and small victories. Each story deepened their connection, revealing trust, understanding, and a sense of belonging neither had ever fully experienced before. As the afternoon sun dipped toward evening, they found themselves on a quiet bridge over the Seine, mirroring the spot where Clara had made her choice days earlier. Julien took her hands in his, looking into her eyes with a mixture of reverence and tenderness. "Clara?" he began, voice steady yet vulnerable. "These past days, they've been extraordinary, and I know life isn't always this perfect. There will be challenges, fears, and moments of doubt. But I promise, whatever comes, we face it together. I choose you, always." Clara's eyes glistened with tears, the culmination of fear, doubt, and joy, coalescing into a single powerful emotion. "And I choose you, Julien," she whispered. "Every day, every moment. I've waited a long time to feel this, to feel safe, seen, and loved." He leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that was tender, grounding, and filled with promise. It wasn't just passion. It was trust, commitment, and the affirmation of all they had endured together. The city around them seemed to pause, the Seine reflecting their embrace, lights shimmering like stars. Later they returned to their suite, the golden glow of Paris night spilling through the windows. They cooked dinner together, laughter echoing through the room as small mishaps, overcooked pasta, spilled wine, became shared stories rather than frustrations. They moved seamlessly between playful teasing and quiet intimacy, a rhythm that symbolized the balance they had found: love tempered by understanding, connection strengthened by vulnerability.
As the evening wound down, Julian pulled Clara close on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. "You've changed everything," he murmured, voice low and filled with awe. "You've reminded me that life is meant to be felt, not controlled, that love is worth the risk, every single time." Clara rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "And you've reminded me that it's okay to step into something beautiful, even if it scares me, that I can trust and be trusted in return." They stood together in silence, the weight of the past days, the challenges they had faced, and the choices they had made, settling around them like a gentle embrace. The accidental meeting on a jet had evolved into something neither could have predicted, a profound connection forged through shared vulnerability, courage, and the willingness to choose love despite fear. The night deepened, and Julian whispered a final thought into the quiet. "Paris will always remember us," he said softly, "but more importantly, we'll remember Paris, the moment we chose each other." Clara smiled, closing her eyes, savoring the certainty and warmth of his words. "Always," she whispered back, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt open, bright, and shared. As the city slept, they remained together, entwined in an embrace that spoke of promises kept, fears faced, and love embraced. The journey that had begun with an accidental boarding of a private jet had led them to this, a connection rooted in authenticity, courage, and the deliberate choice to trust and love fully. And as Paris twinkled beneath them, it was clear: this was just the beginning.